Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapple Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today we start a new series, a series I suspect that most of you never thought would happen, not by me anyway. Today we start a series on the positives of competing in barista competitions, Brewers Cup, roasting competitions, etc., etc. You ready? Let's do it. This podcast is brought to you by Mapple Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapple Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Okay, so the undoable has now started. First, let me give you a preface as to why I wanted to record this series. I pride Map It Forward and everything that we do on open-mindedness. Openness is one of our core values. And so there's not everything nothing really is black and white. And so I decided that I would present the other side of the argument as to why I have the beliefs I have about barista competitions. If you're a long-time listener of this podcast, you know that I don't ever really speak very positively about barista competitions when I do speak about them, which is not very often. But you'll know that I don't have the greatest opinion of them, not because there's anything necessarily wrong with the competitions themselves. It's just that I think that there are some really serious issues that we're not addressing in our industry. And by keeping a constant focus on barista competitions, we are taking away from the real problems in our industry. And so what I decided was that I was going to present 5 episodes, if you can believe it, 5 episodes focused on what you should do if you want to compete in barista competitions, how you can make it work for you, and how you should approach it. So there's a lot that we're going to cover today. But specifically today, I'm going to talk about the value of barista competitions. So you all know, as I said, why I think we shouldn't be putting so much focus on barista competitions. And when I say barista competitions, it's not just barista, the World Barista Championship. It's barista, Brewers Cup, cup tasters, roasters, etc., etc. And so I have spent some time thinking about what you get out of competing and why you should think about doing it. And I came up with 5 of them. And with the help of our Patreon community, we've added 1 to that to make it 6. And so the first thing I think barista competitions are great for is the sense of community. I've always held that belief. I think it's fantastic that it brings so many people together. I know you've heard me talk about the fact that it's kind of lopsided because not everybody can attend them, and we do have a problem there. But for all intents and purposes, barista competitions, whether they're regional or whether they're national or whether they're international, barista competitions provide everybody from our whole industry the opportunity to come and not just compete, but be a spectator. And so if you are competing, it puts you in a situation where you have an audience that become your community. So that's the first really great thing I think barista competitions offer for the coffee industry. Number 2, and this is probably my favorite thing about barista competitions, is that competitors are usually doing their first very hard thing that they've done the first time they enter a barista competition, whether it's regionals or whether it's even just a latte out throwdown. But mostly we're talking about these regional competitions where people, the first time they compete, come to an understanding of having to do a very difficult, focused thing that the end of it, there's no guarantee that they're going to win or lose. And so from my perspective, it's almost as though this is their first time doing a pop-up business, because you don't know if it's going to be successful or not. And we're going to talk about that perspective in a future episode in this series. But doing hard things is a life skill that we should take every opportunity to cultivate as early as we can. And I believe that barista competitions offer baristas in our industry the opportunity to learn the process of starting something, having to go through to the end and actually executing without the idea of knowing whether they're going to be successful by measure of there being one prize. Number 3 is the research and focus that's required to compete well. It's almost like you do a mini thesis on the subject matter that you are presenting on when you enter a barista competition. And that, I think, is wonderful, because in the workplace, we don't really have that time to train our staff on some of the more nuanced things about cafes and the coffee supply chain and the coffee industry and all of that. And so you as a competitor can focus on something that interests you or that you would like to bring attention to, and then you have to spend an extraordinary amount of time learning about that in great detail. And at the end, you have to present a spoken essay of sorts with a background of music. The fourth positive thing that I think barista competitions present is that they really put a spotlight on the producer of the coffee, which typically we don't have the luxury of doing in the cafe because we have such a limited amount of time. And so when you're competing, the coffee and therefore the producer is front and center. And the further you go up through the competitions, the more prestige that is shone on the producer and more attention that is shone on the producer as this moves along. The fifth is the marketing exposure that you get at these competitions when you're competing, when you're preparing. And as we go through this series, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can really take advantage of the process of competing from a business and a marketing perspective in the coffee industry. And I think that, well, I hope that you'll use this information so that competing and winning isn't the only objective that you go to competitions with, but the exposure that you get from attending and participating and researching and doing all of this stuff can reap rewards for you as an employee or as a business owner, as well as the team that you bring along with you. Now, the final positive element, and this comes from our Patreon community, the final positive element, and the sixth one, is that you get to highlight subjects that are perhaps not as mainstream in the industry as they could be. And an example of that is when Madeline who was recently a guest on the podcast and in our Patreon community, when Madeline competed in 2019, Madeline used coffee leaf rust as the centerpiece discussion point of her presentation. And she did that with the intention and the hope that more people would pay attention to what was happening with coffee leaf rust and its potential to really damage the whole community of coffee producers in Hawaii if it happened. And not 2 years later, it did. And so, it is a real opportunity when you are competing to highlight something that means a lot to you, but that is not being spoken about in the industry. And I think that's a really positive element of competing. And so there we go. I promise I'm not somebody who's constantly focused on talking shit about barista competitions. I think there are positives. I've just outlined 6 that I deeply believe in. I am doing this to show that there are really wonderful things that come out of barista competitions and competing. I also am doing this to demonstrate that there is strength in presenting a balanced argument of anything. And we grow as a community when we can see both sides of any discussion. The better part of that is that we are more informed, and so we can make decisions based on all the information. So if barista competitions are right for you, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next 4 episodes, the things of how you can make that happen for you, compete. Just do it without ignoring all of the other really important things that need to happen in our industry to fix things, because barista competitions can only fix a very minute element of our industry based on the way they're being approached now. So come along with me on this journey for the next 4 episodes. I hope that you'll find it massively entertaining watching me having to argue against myself from other times that I've spoken on this subject. Peace, love, and peanut butter, folks. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.